My name is Nancy, and with me are my other longtime partners, Charlie, Joe, David, and John, and we're sitting here in Charlie's backyard and delighted to celebrate our friend Charlie.
I met Chuck in Washington, D.C. I call him Chuck because back in 1969, he was Chuck Daniels. He is now Charlie Daniels. But when I first met him, we were both in the Prettyman Fellowship program at Georgetown. And Chuck arrived in a Corvette convertible. He had driven from Albuquerque all the way to Washington, D.C. with a top down, and his face and forehead were all sunburned. And then there was this white, things around his eyes where he had wearing sunglasses. Well, that's the first time I met Chuck.
I first, learned of Charlie Daniels about 35 years ago. I attended a house party when I was in law school, and he was playing his electric bass guitar with the band Lawyers, Guns, and Money, and then formally met him after he became a justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court.
Charlie and I actually became colleagues exactly 48 years ago this week.
At the law school?
At the law school. Charlie and I both started teaching at the law school on the same day 48 years ago.
And Charlie was my legal director at the New Mexico Civil Liberties Union before I ever went to law school.
And John and I met Charlie also 48 years ago because he came to the law school during our second year in law school, and he was our teacher.
After law school, and after David and I had the temerity to go out and start hanging out our shingles, Charlie joined us after a year, and I think we were both very flattered and excited that he would want to be with us.
And when Chuck finished the Prettyman program, he came back to Albuquerque, and he got a job teaching here at the law school. And so I came and joined the law faculty in 1972, and he had started a semester before me. So he and I essentially anchored the criminal law, criminal procedure curriculum here at the law school.
I think what is so remarkable about Charlie Daniels is his ability to teach and share his knowledge of the law. He taught me as a new justice about the importance of the institution of the Supreme Court, the fact that we were not individual justices, we were a court of 5. We speak in one voice. And to get there, it required agreement, consensus. But to get to an agreement, it took patience and persuasion. And he was able to emulate that every day.
A long time ago, the early 80s, when I was an associate and Charlie was my boss, he agreed to be local counsel in a drug case for a Florida lawyer. And the lawyer sent a brief that was terrible. And I read it and I didn't know what to do with it. And I went to Charlie and said, I don't know what to do. We can't put our name on this brief. And he looked at it and he said, well, we'll call him up. And he called the guy and he said, we've read your brief and we're sorry, we can't put our name on it. And the guy said, well, why did you read it? I thought you assigned this to some girl in your office. And Charlie said, we don't have any girls in this office. You need to find other legal counsel. And then he hung up. And it's just everything about Charlie comes through for me in that.
One of the things that we've worked on together has been bail reform. Chuck really started this bail reform project in New Mexico with an opinion in the case of State versus Brown. And he was very critical of the way the bail system was working in New Mexico. The problem was that the bail system had morphed into a money bail system. Justice Daniels at this time said that that's just totally contrary to our bail rules in the state of New Mexico, and that needed to be changed. He then came to me and asked me if I would do some service. He said, would you chair this ad hoc committee on bail reform? But the reforms that we were able to accomplish were really significant. And some of these reforms required a constitutional amendment. And Justice Daniels essentially went to the legislature, got sponsors for it, lobbied for it, and we got that amendment through the legislature. And then it went to the voters, and it became now a constitutional amendment.
I will never forget the first time he and I were in court. It was a civil rights case. It was a bench trial. There were witnesses, there were opposing counsels, and Charlie led the charge, and he basically put a collar and a leash on the judge, on opposing counsel, on all the witnesses, and just led them around the courtroom. And we won, and it was because his honesty came across, his brilliance came across, and his force of personality came across. And at the end of that, I said to Charlie, I said, that was amazing. You just put a ring through everybody's nose in that courtroom. And he looked at me and he said, that's my job.
There were times when Charlie could actually be cantankerous, or maybe a better word would be didactic, because he had been a law professor. And one time I was dealing with a rule of criminal procedure, and I knew Charlie had just dealt with it a few weeks before, so I went into his office and said, Charlie, what's the deal with this rule? He looks at me and he says, have you read the rule? Because if you haven't, I've got it right here, and I can bring it down and read it for you. And I said, Charlie, what are you talking about? And he laughed, and then we talked about it. Well, many years later, when my younger daughter was clerking for Charlie, she was in law school, and she was clerking for him in the summer. She had to deal with a rule for him. So she went to see him about the rule. And she said, I'd like to talk with you about this rule. And Charlie said, have you read the rule? Because if you haven't, I've got it right here, and I can read it for you. And she said, I've read the rule, and I've outlined all of the cases about the rule. And he looked at her and he said, your dad told you about that, didn't he? And she said, yeah, he did. And they all laughed. Several years later, he officiated at her wedding. So it was a very joyous opportunity to be around Charlie.
I think everyone can relate to this, that Charlie was so genuine. There was never any false pretenses or any bit of arrogance. No matter who his audience was or who he was communicating with, he could relate to them and they could relate to him.
Charlie also knew how to have a good time. I mean, let's not pretend that he was just this guy with great integrity, all of which is true. He was a phenomenal trial lawyer, maybe the best trial lawyer in the state of New Mexico. Although he was married to a woman who probably could give him a good run for his money on that one.
In 92, 93, I decided to go to car racing school, and I had the brochure sitting there, and Charlie said, can I take a look at that? And the next day, Randy called me and said, I'm giving it to Charlie for Christmas. And Charlie and I had the most wonderful time racing cars, and he went on to race them.
The watch. You'd go into Charlie's office, sit down, you'd ask Charlie a question, and invariably after 2.5 or 3 minutes, the watch would come out. We had a case where this father of a student at New Mexico Military Institute called us. It was like on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and his son, who was a graduating senior, top of the class, was caught smoking marijuana outside of the school, and to punish him, they were not going to allow the kid to go on the school trip, which the father thought was very important for him to go. At that time, you could only sue the institution, and the venue was in Santa Fe. Charlie got on the phone. He got a hold of Judge Felter, who was at that time a district court judge. We made arrangements to present a TRO to Judge Felter in his living room at 9:30 that night. We drove up to Santa Fe. Charlie drove the car. I was literally sitting in the backseat of the car with a portable typewriter. This is before computers. Typing up the last of the papers. Finished them just as we arrived at Judge Felter's house. He heard us in his bathrobe. We got the TRO. We got it served. The kid got on his trip.
It was a real honor and pleasure to work with Charlie on the New Mexico Supreme Court. His enthusiasm for the work and devotion to justice was so admirable and was inspirational to me as a justice. When we met for oral arguments, when he'd arrive into the robing room, there was a skip and a hop, and he was ready to do justice.
What would I tell my grandchildren about Charlie? For me, it's simple. Charlie loved life, and he lived life to its fullest. period.
I had a law partner who was much more than a law partner for me. He was like a Jiminy Cricket sitting on my shoulder. And if I had a problem or an issue, not just in the law, but in other things, I could hear that little voice telling me, this is the right thing to do. That's the way Charlie was for me, and is.
I think everybody in this community, including the four of us, regard him as a person that is a moral center of gravity in their lives, whatever it is, racing cars, playing music, practicing law. Everyone feels as though their lives have been greatly influenced and by Charlie's example, and he has given them great joy as a result of his presence in their lives. And that's what I felt throughout the time that he and I were partners. It was just a great joy to be associated with him.
I think he is a perfect choice for this award. He has a lot of connections to the law school. I mean, he graduated from this law school. He taught at this law school as a faculty member. Then he taught as an adjunct. He always would come back for orientation and give welcoming speeches to students. I think that he's one of our most distinguished alumni, and I think he is totally deserving of this award. I'm really delighted to see that he gets it. And I know that I and others had nominated him earlier, but he refused to accept this award while he was on the court. So this is overdue, and it is well deserved.
For me, it's his integrity and honesty and his joy at practicing law. Being around Charlie just made you want to practice law the way Charlie practiced law.
I think Charlie Daniels is so deserving of this award, this outstanding achievement award from the law school, and I'm honored that he has asked me to share my views of his work and his impact on our judiciary, our legal community in New Mexico.
Well, Chuck, or Justice Daniels, or Charlie, I think it's really wonderful that you're getting this award. You totally deserve it, and I'm really proud of everything that you've done for the law school and for the profession in the state of New Mexico.
You had a wonderful victory leap when you won a case. Just jump up and down.
I tried many, many cases with Charlie around the state. And after the trial, and with all humility, with Charlie on your side, it was an acquittal. We would stop in the middle of the street and give each other a kiss.
I just want to share with you, Randy, that he was one of a kind.